ghost towns with streets frozen in time, industrial sites reclaimed by rust and weeds, railway stations where no trains have stopped for half a century. Across the Red Centre, along forgotten coastlines, and deep in mountain valleys, Australia's vast interior holds secrets most people never see. These aren't just abandoned buildings gathering dust under the harsh sun. They're monuments to ambition that collapsed when the money ran out, industries that died overnight when markets shifted, and communities that simply ceased to exist when their reason for being disappeared. Some were wiped out by economic crashes that left families with nothing. Others fell victim to natural disasters that never allowed recovery, or shifting government priorities that erased them from official maps. The stories are remarkably similar, no matter where you look. A resource is discovered. A town explodes into existence. Hundreds or thousands of people arrive chasing wealth and opportunity. Then the resource runs out, the market collapses, or technology makes the entire operation obsolete. Within months or years, the population vanishes. Buildings are abandoned mid-use, sometimes with furniture still inside and dishes on tables. Today, 13 forgotten places across the Australian continent stand as eerie reminders of what happens when progress moves on without you. From Western Australia's deadly asbestos fields to Queensland's abandoned sugar junctions, from mountain silver towns to coastal pearling ports. These locations tell stories of boom, bust, and the brutal reality of survival in the harshest country on Earth. This is the Australia nobody talks about, the one left to rot when the dream died. If you're fascinated by hidden Australian history and the stories behind Australia's forgotten corners, subscribe now. We explore abandoned places, lost industries, and the people left behind every week. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next investigation. Number 1. Wittenoom, Western Australia, the town that killed its residents. In the Pilbara region, about 1,200 kilometres north of Perth, sits the most dangerous ghost town in Australia. Wittenoom was once home to 20,000 people during the 1950s and 60s. The blue asbestos mine at nearby Gorge employed hundreds of workers who dug out the deadly mineral and shipped it across the country. The mine operated from 1937 to 1966, producing over 160,000 tons of blue asbestos. Workers and their families breathed in microscopic fibers every single day. By the time the health risks became undeniable, it was too late. More than 2,000 people who lived or worked in Wittenoom have died from asbestos-related diseases. The town was officially degazetted in 2007, erased from maps and road signs. Today, the remaining buildings stand empty under the scorching Pilbara sun. The contaminated soil still contains deadly asbestos fibers. A handful of stubborn residents refuse to leave, living in a town the government pretends doesn't exist. Number 2. Farina, South Australia, the town that ran out of water. Deep in the arid desert north of Adelaide, Farina was established in 1871 as a hub for Afghan camel drivers who transported goods across the interior. At its peak in 1920, Farina had 600 residents, 2 hotels, a bakery, 2 breweries, and an underground bakery that used geothermal heat to bake bread. The problem was water, or the lack of it. The town relied on a single bore that became increasingly unreliable as the population grew. When the railway extended further north and bypassed Farina, the town's purpose evaporated. The last families left in 1967, abandoning stone buildings to the desert. Today, the ruins of Farina stretch across the red sand. The old stone buildings have partially collapsed, their walls slowly returning to dust. Volunteers have stabilized some structures, but the town remains a graveyard of broken dreams and failed infrastructure. Number 3. Cassilis, New South Wales, the railway town that lost its tracks. In the Hunter Valley, About 300 kilometres northwest of Sydney, Cassilis was a thriving railway junction in the early 1900s. The town serviced steam locomotives travelling between Newcastle and the Western Plains. When diesel engines replaced steam and the railway line was rerouted in the 1970s, Cassilis lost its reason to exist. The railway station closed in 1975. Buildings that once housed railway workers and their families now sit abandoned along the empty main street. The platforms where thousands of passengers once waited are now cracked concrete overtaken by weeds. Several heritage-listed buildings remain, including the old post office and the railway hotel, but most are locked up and deteriorating. The town's population has dropped from over 1,000 to fewer than 300. Those who remain live among the ghosts of a community that once thrived on the sound of steam whistles and the clatter of iron wheels. Number 4. Cossack, Western Australia, the pearling port that silted up. On the Pilbara coast, Cossack was Western Australia's first port in the northwest. Established in 1863, the town became a major pearling centre by the 1880s. Japanese and Malay divers risked their lives in shark-infested waters, diving for pearl shell that was shipped to markets in Europe and Asia. At its height, Cossack had a population of over 6,000 people. The town boasted a courthouse, police station, post office, and several hotels. But nature had other plans. The harbour began silting up, making it increasingly difficult for ships to dock. When the pearling industry collapsed in the early 1900s, there was no reason to stay. The cyclone of 1980 devastated what remained. Today, the stone buildings of Cossack stand empty on the red dirt shoreline. The old courthouse and police station have been partially restored as museums, but most of the town is a collection of roofless walls and crumbling foundations. The harbour where pearl luggers once anchored is now a shallow mudflat. Number 5. Ravenswood, Queensland, the gold town hanging by a thread. Inland from Townsville, about 80 kilometres southwest, Ravenswood exploded into existence in 1868 when gold was discovered in the surrounding hills. By 1870, over 3,000 miners worked the reefs, and the town had grown to become one of Queensland's largest. Hotels lined the main street. The Imperial Hotel and the Railway Hotel served miners who spent their earnings on whiskey and card games. But gold mining is a boom and bust business. When the easily accessible gold ran out in the 1910s and 20s, miners moved on. The population crashed from thousands to a few hundred. Today, Ravenswood survives, barely, with around 100 permanent residents. Many buildings on the main street are abandoned. The Imperial Hotel still operates, serving drinks in a dining room that hasn't been updated since 1960. Several heritage-listed structures are slowly collapsing. The old courthouse is boarded up. The miners' cottages along the hillside are falling into their foundations. Yet, a small gold mine still operates nearby, keeping Ravenswood alive on life support. Number 6. Gwalia, Western Australia, the mining town frozen in 1963. Near Leonora in the goldfields, about 240 kilometres north of Kalgoorlie, Gwalia was built around the Sons of Gwalia gold mine. The mine opened in 1897 and quickly became one of the richest in Australia. Herbert Hoover, who later became President of the United States, worked here as a mine manager in his 20s. The town thrived until 1963 when the mine closed due to falling gold prices. Within months, the entire population evacuated. Houses were left with furniture still inside. The general store was abandoned with goods on the shelves. Children's toys remained in yards. For decades, Gwalia remained untouched, a perfect snapshot of 1960s Australian mining life. The mine reopened in the 1980s, but the old town was preserved as a ghost town and museum. Today, visitors can walk through the abandoned State Hotel, peer into miners' cottages with beds still made and photographs on walls, and see the general store exactly as it was left. Gwalia is Australia's most perfectly preserved ghost town, a time capsule that shows what happens when an entire community vanishes overnight. The contrast between the operating modern mine and the frozen ghost town creates an unsettling effect. Number 7. Nunes, New South Wales. The shale oil town that poisoned itself. In the Woolgan Valley, about 150 kilometres northwest of Sydney, Nunes was built in 1900 to process oil shale. The Commonwealth Oil Corporation constructed an enormous processing plant that employed hundreds of workers. The company built a town to house them, complete with a school, hotel, and rows of weatherboard cottages. The problem was the process itself. Heating shale rock to extract oil created toxic waste that contaminated the surrounding environment. The operation was never profitable. By 1932, the plant closed and the town was abandoned. Today, the ruins of the shale processing plant dominate the valley. Massive concrete foundations and rusted machinery are scattered across the site. The old hotel, known as the Nunes Hotel, operated for decades after the plant closed, serving bushwalkers and tourists. It finally shut down in 2009. Now it sits empty, windows broken, furniture rotting. The workers' cottages have collapsed into piles of weathered timber. The entire valley is a monument to industrial failure and environmental destruction. Number 8. Yeranderee, New South Wales. The silver mining town in the mountains. High in the rugged country southwest of Sydney, Yeranderee was established in 1879 when silver was discovered in the surrounding ranges. By the early 1900s, the town had 3,000 residents, multiple hotels, a school, and a post office. Miners extracted silver and lead from underground shafts cut deep into the mountain. But the ore was low grade and transport costs were crippling. Getting the silver out of the mountains and to markets required pack horses and later trucks on terrible roads. When the price of silver crashed in the 1920s, the mines closed. Families left, taking what they could carry. Today, Yeranderee is accessible only by four-wheel drive on rough mountain tracks. A handful of buildings remain standing, including the old corrugated iron school and several miners' cottages. The cemetery on the hillside contains graves of miners killed in accidents and children who died from diseases. One family now owns most of the town and operates it as a remote retreat. But the majority of Yeranderee is a collection of rusted machinery, collapsed mine shafts, and weathered timber slowly being reclaimed by the Australian bush. Number 9. Goldsboro, Queensland. The railway town that disappeared into cane fields. South of Cairns, near Innisfail in far north Queensland, Goldsboro was established in the late 1800s as a railway junction for sugarcane plantations. The town had a railway station, post office, school, and several stores. Sugarcane trains rattled through daily, transporting harvested cane to processing mills on the coast. But mechanization changed everything. Larger trucks replaced small gauge railways. Cane could be transported directly from farms to mills without stopping at junction towns. By the 1970s, Goldsboro's railway station closed. The post office shut down. The school lost students and finally closed in the early 2000s. Today, Goldsboro is barely recognizable as a town. The old railway station is an overgrown ruin surrounded by sugarcane fields. A few houses remain occupied, but most buildings have been demolished or collapsed. The main street is now a dirt track through dense tropical vegetation. The humidity and heavy rainfall of far north Queensland have accelerated the decay. Within another decade, Goldsboro will be completely erased, swallowed by the cane fields it once served. Number 10. Altunga, Northern Territory, the gold rush town in the desert heart. About 100 kilometres east of Alice Springs, Altunga holds the distinction of being the first significant European settlement in Central Australia. Gold was discovered here in 1887, and within years, over 300 miners were working the reefs in temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius. Water was so scarce that it was hauled in by camel from sources 50 kilometres away. At its peak, Araltunga had a police station, post office, 2 stores, and a battery of stamp mills crushing ore. The problem was isolation and harsh conditions. Getting supplies in and gold out was incredibly difficult. When richer goldfields opened closer to the coast, miners abandoned Araltunga. By 1912, the town was effectively dead. Today, the stone ruins of Araltunga are preserved as a historical reserve. The old police station still stands today, its thick stone walls built to withstand the desert heat. The foundations of the government battery and the miners' stone huts dot the landscape. Rusted mining equipment litters the site. But what makes Araltunga particularly haunting is its location. In every direction, there's nothing but red sand, spinifex, and harsh desert ranges. The nearest town is Alice Springs, an hour's drive away. Araltunga stands as a monument to the insane determination of miners who tried to extract wealth from one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. Number 11. Coolgardie, Western Australia, the golden city that became a ghost. About 40 kilometres west of Kalgoorlie in the goldfields, Coolgardie was Australia's third largest city in 1895, with a population of over 15,000. The gold rush that started in 1892 transformed a desert waterhole into a booming metropolis. The main street, Bailey Street, stretched for kilometres with 2-storey hotels, banks, stock exchanges, and shops selling luxury goods imported from Europe. Electric streetlights were installed before many capital cities had them. But Coolgardie's boom was built on surface gold that quickly ran out. By 1905, the population had crashed to less than 700. Today, Coolgardie survives as a small highway town with fewer than 1,000 residents. But the evidence of its past dominance is everywhere. Massive 2-storey hotels stand empty on Bailey Street. The Old Town Hall is a museum displaying photographs of the glory years. Former bank buildings are now vacant lots. The railway station, once bustling with passengers and freight, handles only occasional mineral trains. Walking down the main street feels like touring a museum of lost opportunity, a city that thought it would rival Melbourne but ended up a dusty relic. Number 12. Silverton, New South Wales, the mining town that became a film set. Near Broken Hill in far western New South Wales, Silverton was founded in 1883 when rich silver deposits were discovered. Within 2 years, the town had 3,000 residents, 18 pubs, and a brewery. It looked set to rival Broken Hill as a major mining centre, but the silver proved harder to extract than expected, and water was scarce. By 1890, most miners had moved to nearby Broken Hill, where ore was easier to process. Silverton's population collapsed to fewer than 100. The town should have died completely. Instead, it found a second life as a film location. The stark desert landscape and authentic period buildings attracted filmmakers. Mad Max 2 was filmed here in 1981. Since then, over 100 films, commercials, and music videos have used Silverton as a backdrop. Today, the town survives on tourism. The Silverton Hotel operates as a pub and museum. A handful of art galleries occupy old buildings. But step away from the main street, and you find the real ghost town. Collapsed miners' cottages line the back streets. The old school is a roofless ruin. The cemetery on the hillside contains dozens of graves from the brief boom years, many of them children who died from disease. Number 13. Witchcliff, Western Australia, the timber town that vanished. In the Margaret River region, about 270 kilometres south of Perth, Witchcliff was established in the 1930s as a mill town processing the massive curry forests of the southwest. The Witchcliff Mill employed hundreds of workers who felled the giant curry trees and processed them into railway sleepers and construction timber. The town had a school, general store, and rows of weatherboard houses for mill workers and their families. But as the accessible curry forests were logged out and environmental concerns grew in the 1970s and 80s, the mill became uneconomical. It closed permanently in 1982. Most families left immediately, moving to nearby towns like Margaret River and Augusta. Today, Witchcliff exists as a tiny hamlet with fewer than 50 permanent residents. The old mill site is an empty clearing, overgrown with weeds. Most of the workers' cottages have been demolished or relocated. A few heritage buildings remain, including the old hall and the general store, but they're privately owned and deteriorating. The state forest has reclaimed the land where the curry logs were once stacked. Within the dense forest, you can still find rusted sawmill equipment and the stumps of massive curry trees, some over 3 meters in diameter, cut down during the boom years. Witchcliff is disappearing so completely that in another generation, few will remember it existed. These 13 places across Australia share a common story, but each one reveals something different about how communities collapse. They were built on single industries that collapsed or resources that ran out, and when that single pillar fell, everything built on top of it came crashing down. Wittenoom shows what happens when profit is prioritized over human life, leaving a death toll that continues decades after the town was officially erased. Farina demonstrates the harsh reality that in the Australian interior, water determines everything, and no amount of determination can overcome its absence. Cassilis and Goldsborough prove that when transport infrastructure changes, entire towns become redundant overnight. The residents didn't fail. The towns didn't make mistakes. They simply became unnecessary when railways were rerouted or trucks replaced trains. Cossack and the gold towns reveal the temporary nature of resource extraction. The gold runs out, the harbour silts up, and what seemed permanent vanishes within a generation. When the reason for their existence disappeared, so did the people. What remains now are stone walls slowly returning to dust under the relentless Australian sun, rusted machinery oxidizing in the salt air and desert heat, and the profound silence of places where thousands once lived and worked. The buildings decay at different rates depending on climate. In the tropical north, humidity and vegetation consume everything within decades. In the dry interior, structures can stand for over a century, preserved by the arid conditions. These forgotten places aren't failures of the people who built them. They're testaments to the brutal truth that in Australia, if the land doesn't want you there, if the economics don't support you, or if the government decides you're no longer convenient, eventually you will lose. The continent is littered with the wreckage of dreams that didn't survive contact with economic reality and environmental harshness. Every abandoned building was once somebody's home, workplace, or gathering place. Every empty street was once filled with children playing and workers heading to shifts. The silence in these places is the loudest thing about them. What do you think? Should these places be preserved as historical sites, or should we let nature reclaim them completely? Are there lessons in these abandoned towns for modern Australia, especially as new mining booms promise wealth in remote locations? Write your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation into Australia's forgotten corners interested you, subscribe for more hidden history from across the continent. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.